Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on remote infrastructure management. I'm very pleased to be here. Hope you've had a wonderful couple of days so far, and that this session will add to your knowledge base attending here at NASSCOM. It's a relatively new topic for NASSCOM. I think this is the first year that there's been a remote infrastructure management topic at NASSCOM. So we're happy to have a panel of experts here. Both clients and buyers of remote infrastructure management service, as well as the supplier side represented. The format of this will be, we'll let each of our panelists say a couple of words on their ideas and perceptions on the remote infrastructure management market, as it is in India, and the context for that globally, and where the Indian market may fit within that global context. And then we'll open it up, as always, for questions from the audience. My name is Paul Schmidt. I'm with TPI. I'm our partner and managing director for, I'm sorry, I'm seeing some waving. Can everybody hear me in the back? Can everyone hear in the back? Okay, he might have been waving at somebody else. I thought he was waving that he couldn't hear. For our global service delivery practice, which focuses on primarily offshore locations around the world and how our clients can effectively use them. Also with me today is Ravindra Jaral from Sprint, down on the end, I believe here. Yep, there he is. He's the GM of offshore operations with Sprint. Obviously both a buyer and a consumer and a supplier of remote infrastructure management services. We have Santosh Srinivasan. I hope I got it at least somewhat close. With Cummins. He's the director of offshore relations and security with Cummins here in India. We also have Mark Franciosa with BOC, and I'll let him explain what BOC is. Since I did a poor job earlier with him, I think he's a better expert than I am on that. And he's the director of information management and supply with them. And we have Swapan Johri with HCL, who is the VP of infrastructure management with HCL. With that, I'd like to make a couple of observations from my perspective and then pass it over to the panelists. We at TPI see a wide variety of deals. You may have heard in some of the other sessions relative to primarily what the Global 2000 are doing with their outsourcing, whether it be infrastructure management, remote infrastructure management, BPO, and ADM. And I think we're seeing a couple of interesting trends in the remote infrastructure management area. The first is that we believe this market is actually much bigger than what you read about in the press. And the reason for that is that what we see when we do our consulting with multinational clients is that there's a great deal of remote infrastructure management happening that isn't in the press and that is hidden within a multinational corporation. So for example, a CSC or an IBM or an EDS does an overall infrastructure deal with a large corporation. A portion of that is definitely remote infrastructure management, but it never gets publicized or into the market data as a remote infrastructure management deal. So the bottom line is that we think there's a lot more of this going on, and it's a much larger market than is generally perceived. Secondly, what we find is that the remote infrastructure management market is more diversified geographically. Quite a few other centers of excellence beyond India, quite a center of scale in Brazil happening, centers of scale in China happening, certain pieces of Eastern Europe coming into the game. So I think from a geographical market share type of standpoint that this market will be much more diverse and much more competitive across many more geographies than what we consider to be more of the traditional software IT ADM side of the business relative to India. Thirdly, we see this segment as requiring of the service provider, whether they be a multinational or an Indian company. We're starting to get away from making a distinction between those, but for purposes of that's how everybody is categorizing them at the conference today. But whomever is providing these services needs a much broader and deeper global footprint. That it's not possible to have huge centers of mass in one country with only very small satellites in select other locations, but really need a deep global capabilities, whether that be internally or through very tight partnerships with quality partners that act in an integrated fashion. Finally, we think it's interesting and will be interesting to see in terms of the growth of this market how willing or unwilling the large global clients will be to bundle and or unbundle their infrastructure services. We don't see a discerning trend one way or another quite yet around that. We have some clients that are willing to carve out certain pieces of their infrastructure and give that to a different supplier for remote infrastructure management services. We have quite a few other clients that say, I want the one, as they say, one throat to choke routine, and I want to put all of my infrastructure with one supplier so that I only have one place to go and I don't have the complexities of managing all of that within my own organization, and I can have a relatively lean client organization and worry about relationships with one supplier. So with that, I'd like to, I will start right to left. I'd like to turn it over to Mark for his opening comments.
Sure, thank you for the intro, Paul. I'm the Group Director of Information Management and Supply at BOC, which is British Oxygen, although we do get some interesting hits on Google, like Bank of China, Bank of Canada, but we typically operate in the industrial gases space. We've had a long journey in global sourcing, so I thought what I would do is try and put it into context from a consumer, the services, and where we've come from. And if I go back to where we came from as a company, we started back in '98 globalizing our business and going from regional organizations into a global organization, and underpinning that was our ERP and our global enterprise systems, and trying to deploy them so that we had consistency in our business across the world. As we looked to do that, we developed a global sourcing strategy for internal and externally provided services to differentiate, where would we provide them from if we were doing them internally, where would we get them from if we were buying them, and what were the long-term things that we just couldn't give up, but what were the tactical ones that we would be able to do in the short term. And we ended up doing quite a bit of regional outsourcing in the infrastructure space because our systems were regionally based. We hadn't quite moved them yet. And now what we found ourselves in the last couple of years is moving from regional outsourcing to more of offshoring, and using India predominantly to provide us both remote infrastructure management in our non-ERP platforms, but also around a lot of other services, so global help desk services, and we've used ADM for quite some time in the Indian market. So if we look at the market and where we think the services are, they've matured quite a bit. When we first started looking at offshoring and remote infrastructure, we did it in context of our local business. We have a fairly large Indian business, probably better known as Indian Oxygen than BOC, and we looked at the skill sets that we had in the company, what they were able to provide, and we looked at the market at the same time and saw that the skills were really starting to mature, and the services that were being offered were something that we could utilize. And that's probably within the last couple of years that we've started using more and more of remote infrastructure management.